Hi everyone, welcome back to Counseling and Virtual Care. Here we go again. This is another week of fun and exciting content. We're still looking at basic counseling skills. So far, we've been only introducing you guys to the ideas of counseling, perhaps looking a little bit at the difference between counseling and psychotherapy, and so on and so forth. All interesting stuff, but now, from this week on, we're starting to delve deeper into the basic counseling skills that we actually been promising you guys. So by now you might be thinking, come on, let's get to the nitty gritty, let's get to the good stuff. So here we go. In this video, we'll be talking about active listening skills. I would say active listening skills is one of the main things that you will want to take away from this course. One of the main things that you will want to learn and develop. If there's anything that you want to take away, think about active listening skills. So what is it? These are the things that we'll be talking about during this week in the video lecture and the tutorials. We'll be talking about details like, for example, verbal and non-verbal behavior, joining, minimal responses, and things that counselors and psychologists will be showing to clients to demonstrate that they're actually actively listening. And the idea is, if we provide all of these elements carefully, the clients will feel heard, will feel understood, and will start opening up and releasing, or I guess dropping these resistance and barriers, and start exploring their emotional concerns or emotional issues. And that's exactly what we try to do in counseling. So that's pretty much what we'll be covering this week. I hope you enjoy the content, and here we go. In this video, we'll focus on joining, active listening, minimal responses, and the use of non-verbal responses. These are foundational counseling skills that you will very likely need to apply in almost any counseling and non-counseling setting. Once more, remember that you will not be a trained counselor after this course, and you should not provide counseling services. Now, having said that, let's start looking at the content. In the previous video, we defined counseling, and we said it was when one person intentionally facilitates personal growth. So, what do we mean by personal growth? Well, personal growth is usually stifled by troubling times, and these difficult times are usually marked by emotional difficulties. So basically, when people see a counselor because they are emotionally troubled, they hope they will be able to talk to someone in confidence about their problems, hoping to find a solution and feel better. And that feeling better usually comes from resolving or starting to resolve, their specific issues. And that is why we talk about personal growth, because if the client is able to overcome an issue and the emotional difficulties associated with it, then they are probably maturing, growing, and expanding their awareness. And here lies one of the key ideas behind counseling and personal growth, and this is joining. Now, joining can mean different things in different contexts, but in counseling, joining refers to creating a bond between the client and counselor. So the counselor is able to show the client that she is there for them, that she's listening, that she's willing to be attuned to the client's emotions as they unfold. So again, joining is all about creating a sense of connection or emotional bridge between the client and the counselor. Now, you may be wondering, how do we create this sense of connection? Well, mostly by listening. As Gelder and Gelder say, the primary task of the counselor is to listen. Now, the type of listening required in counseling is called active listening. So what's the difference between these, what I just mentioned, active listening, and any other type of listening? Well, in daily activities, you may be listening to other people, but it's very rare that all we do is just listen. And more likely that we will be, aside from listening, we'll be checking our phones, we'll be being distracted by a bird flying, and many other things while we are listening. So in a way, our attention is not undivided, and we're probably not actively listen. Alternatively, in active listening, we are listening with interest. It is not passive, and we should be wholly absorbed and immersed in the task of listening to our client. This active listening needs to be done in a way that the client recognizes that we, the counselors, are totally focusing our attention on what is being said, and we need to show that we are understanding what is being said. Now, we already mentioned a few times that the most important thing in counseling is a connection between the counselor and the client. In other words, this idea of the therapeutic relationship. But how do we build or develop that client-counselor relationship? So once more, we can do this by actively listening. 𝓃𝒶𝑜'𝓈 also uses the phrase emphatic listening to refer to active listening. And we've got a nice quote here. He defines emphatic listening as entering the private perceptual world of the other and becoming thoroughly at home in it. It involves being sensitive, moment by moment, to the changing felt meanings which flow in the other person, to the fear or rage or tenderness or whatever they are experiencing. It means temporarily living in the other's life, moving about it delicately without making judgments. So you can probably imagine that this idea of emphatic listening, or almost feeling what the client is feeling, will necessarily require being really focused and attuned to what the client is saying and what they're feeling. In other words, it requires that the counselor is actively listening. So active listening helps build trust between client and counselor. It helps bridge the differences, helps clients feel heard and understood, and they are more likely to disclose their problems if they feel heard and understood. But it also helps the counselor gather important information, because it will clarify why the client is seeing us, what they intend to get from the counseling process, and what is happening for them. So again, how do we actually do this active listening? Well, there are many elements involved in active listening, and here there are. We can think of maintaining eye contact, open posture, avoid distractive movements, no interruptions, minimal responses, non-verbal behavior, use of voice, and finally, the use of silence. Let's look at the first one, eye contact. We need to maintain eye contact to show the client all our attention is focused on what they are saying and what they're doing. But we want to be mindful that too much eye contact can also be distracting or annoying for the client. So the key here is to find the right balance. We can also think about open posture. This is quite important because an open posture gives a welcoming message and a closed posture doesn't. An open posture includes things like arms on the side or the body and head of the counselor pointing towards the client to signal that we are happy to hear what they're saying. Alternatively, a closed posture may convey a message of not being ready or not willing to listen to what their client is saying. These ideas of open and closed postures also fall within the scope of body language. Body language says a lot, and we as counselors should be projecting a welcoming body language. We also need to avoid distracting movements, because our clients could interpret that as a sign that we're not interested in what they're saying and could disrupt the rapport and make them lose their train of thought. For example, if we move suddenly on our chair or look at our wristwatch, our clients are likely to perceive that as a sign that we are not interested in what they're saying. Another really important thing we must do at all times is do not interrupt. Not interrupting is a sign of respect and helps build rapport. Because when someone interrupts someone else, they are almost saying, or at some level they're saying, I don't really care what you have to say, or they may be also saying, what I have to say is more important than what you have to say. Hence, I am more important than you. And you can see how that dynamic can hinder and can prevent this idea of rapport building process. Let's imagine for a moment that we have a client that has been brought up by parents who very rarely express their love, and they always impose conditions to accept this child. You can imagine how difficult would that be for our client to feel loved, to have a sense of worth, and that they have intrinsic value. Well, by listening actively, the counselor can make the client feel valued and respected, can make the client feel that there are no strings attached and no conditions imposed to be accepted. By doing this, the client feels unconditional acceptance and will likely trust the counselor and be more likely to open up and talk about their feelings and improve the effectiveness of the counseling process. We also need to consider a cultural element in this idea of interruptions, because it could very well be that in some cultures it is common to interrupt other people. For example, in Argentina, people often talk over other people, which makes the first person talk louder and we end up losing our voices and we all have big headaches. Even though that's part of our culture, counselors in Argentina will not interrupt their clients. And if they do, it is likely that the client will not feel valued, will not feel heard and respected. In a book called 𝓃𝒶𝑜'𝓈, Gerard Egan calls this idea of respecting the other and not talking over other people turn taking. He says that dialogue is interactive and demands engagement, whereas monologues breed isolation. So, in this context, a dialogue would mean something like, now I talk, now you talk, now I talk, now you talk. A monologue will be pretty much proposing clashing or clashes between what I want to say versus what someone else wants to say, because if I am having a monologue, then the other person can't say anything, and you can see how it breeds isolation. So it is unlikely that a counselor will start talking uninterruptedly during any session, and if they do, it will probably not be a very effective counseling process. But it is likely that, or it may happen that our clients will talk for long periods of time. Hi everyone, here I am popping up in this video. I just wanted to quickly interrupt the flow of this video because I wanted to talk about, or I guess give you guys an example, what we were saying before in terms of someone talking incessantly. So there's a client that I've been seeing now for maybe 5-6 sessions, a young female. She's around 9 years old, and she's quite aware that she, as she calls herself, she can be a chatterbox. And actually last week or the week before, we were trying to put a little bit of perspective as to what it means for her to be a chatterbox. To see whether she sees that adjective as a positive, as a negative, thing that is being said about her, or maybe she doesn't give any value or she doesn't pay attention to that at all. So we started talking about the idea of social skills, learning social skills. So for example, this idea of turn taking, and being part of a conversation where in a conversation there's more than one person. So if I'm talking all the time, then the other person is not able to talk at all, and perhaps it's not a conversation anymore. So again, from session 1, this young female client realized that she had been told that she was talking a lot. And I get the sense that this is something that she's intended to change. But the thing is, the idea of accumulating a lot of thoughts, as she calls it, I've got all these thoughts in my head, and throughout in the sessions are really good. I'm enjoying them because I get to put all my thoughts out there and they're not in my head anymore. So regardless of the presentation and the diagnosis and whatever, I guess what I'm trying to say is sometimes some people do have that need for an outlet where they can talk uninterruptedly. So this idea of a dialogue and taking turns and not interrupting other people, it's very, very valid for the counselor. We definitely don't want to interrupt our clients. But it's sometimes valid for the client, because if the client is feeling inspired or needs to use the space to talk interactively, so be it. It's probably more productive if the counselor has an input and is able to reflect and perhaps help the client understand the direction of the sessions and whatnot. But again, with this female client, she will start talking from session 1. I remember she talked for the whole session. I didn't have a chance to even put a single bite. And that was okay, because that's what she needed at that time. But here's an interesting concept or an interesting idea, something that I found across a few clients already. This idea of homeostasis or homeostasis. What does that mean? Think about sleep. For example, when you go to sleep, you fall asleep, the melatonin rises, you fall asleep, you do your whole sleep cycle, wake up the following day, either feeling refreshed or not so much, depending on how many hours you slept. If you sleep less than what you need, then the following night it's likely that you will catch up on your sleep. Or eventually, at some point, that's the idea of homeostasis, you will reach a threshold where you need to sleep. If you haven't slept for 2 days, you probably start falling asleep as soon as you sit down or do other activities when you're not supposed to fall asleep. With the need for talking, I found something similar happens. And perhaps there may be a client where, like myself, like this example I was just saying before, where they start talking incessantly and you may not have a chance either to say anything throughout the session. But in the next session, just like what happened with this child in the second, third and fourth session, she was still talking quite a bit, but she was able to listen a little bit more, and it was starting to become a dialogue where neither of us was interrupting each other, but we were able to give each other space and the ability to listen to what the other had to say. So what I'm trying to say, sometimes some clients will have this need to talk and pour it all out, and maybe second, third, fourth session, this process will regulate itself, the threshold will be lower, and this need for talking would have been addressed. And the idea of interaction and dialogue will be much more, easier and will flow. Another element we can think of when we think about active listening is minimal responses. Minimal responses are something we naturally do in conversation when we are listening rather than talking. And we do this to show the speaker that they have our full attention and we're listening to what they're saying. Minimal responses are sometimes non-verbal and include just a nod of the head. But minimal responses can also be verbal, including things like I see, sure, right, and many more. These expressions let the clients know that we are actively listening to what they're saying, but it also encourages them to continue talking. We call them minimal because they let the client know that we're listening attentively, but because they are quite short and not seen as an interruption. We could use phrases slightly longer, like go on or tell me more, but the idea is to disrupt the thought process as little as possible while showing our client that we are really there for them. And that is why we encourage the use of minimal responses. Here are the 3 types of minimal responses we just mentioned. The first one, non-verbal. This can include various behaviors such as hand gestures, nods, nodding the head, changing the posture, eye movement, or simply using silence. Semi-verbal, this includes sounds or words that indicate understanding, for example, right, okay, etc. And verbal, these are short phrases used to encourage the client to continue. For example, please continue or tell me more. In their book called Basic Personal Counseling, 𝓃𝒶𝑜'𝓈 and 𝓃𝒶𝑜'𝓈 call these minimal verbal responses as brief invitations to continue. These are quite similar, but the brief invitations to continue are used to show interest and keep the client engaged in the thought, asking or probing for more information. I will definitely recommend checking out their book, 𝓃𝒶𝑜'𝓈 and 𝓃𝒶𝑜'𝓈. It's really good, it has a lot of information and it covers all the content that we are covering here. Now, going back to what we were just discussing in terms of minimal responses, we need to be mindful of not using minimal responses too often. Otherwise, it will become intrusive and will likely be more annoying for a client than helpful. Using too many minimal responses could also be interpreted as mechanistic, or that we're just faking interest rather than genuinely caring for what our clients are saying. Now, for those of you who like The Office, you will recognize this video. For those of you who don't, the person we'll see here is Dwight Schrute. I definitely recommend checking out this show. I usually take snippets out of the show because I really like how they use comedy to illustrate certain points. Now, I chose this video to show what I was just saying before, the minimal responses, for example, nodding the head. If it's done too mechanistic or too exaggerated, can come across as fake or that we're not really caring for the client. So let's watch this video.
Okay, when you're selling to women, it is crucial that you listen, Dwight. Also, you want to respect their... Are you listening now?
Yes.
Okay, well, you have to show us.
That's impossible. Listening happens in the ear and in the brain. I mean, some organisms have external hairs that vibrate to indicate auditory stimulation, but unfortunately, our external hairs don't vibrate at all.
Uh-huh. Uh-huh.
What are you doing?
A little smile and a nod shows that I hear you. Got it?
Kind of.
Nellie, why don't you tell Dwight what we were doing earlier today, and Dwight, you show us that you're listening.
Well, we were in the warehouse where we were discussing the mural that I've commissioned Pam to paint there. We were talking about the colour schemes and the major themes we want to hit. Children of the world coming together, cutting down trees to make paper, but not in a child laboury way.
It's just up and down. Just a regular nod, like a person.
I am a person.
Of
Yes.
course, you're a person.
Yeah.
We can do this, all right? And then we thought I can't carry on with that face. Look at it, I'm going to get nightmares with that face. I mean, he looks like he is labouring over a stool having just eaten human flesh.
It's a bit extreme.
No, I'm sorry, but that is true.
So once more, I thought that clip was pretty funny and it was a good way to introduce humor to show us this idea of minimal responses. Of course, what Dwight Schrute was doing, that's not what we expect our counselors to do, and you can imagine how it would be at the very minimum distracting for the client. Now here we've got another video where we are actually showing, of course, another mock-up counseling session, but in this case the counselor is actually doing a few of the things that we expect a counselor would do, such as the use of minimal responses, joining, active listening, and so on. So let's watch this video and see if we can identify a few of the things that we ideally would like to carry on and use in our counseling sessions.
Great. So 𝓃𝒶𝑜'𝓈, what would you like to talk about today?
I have a coaching client, and I want to make sure that I am being an effective coach in this relationship. I don't know if I'm doing her any good anymore, and I don't know whether it's my own self-judgment because I've checked in with her. I've said, you know, is this serving you? And she says yes, and she's affirmative. She says she gets a lot out of every call, but it's an ongoing relationship that doesn't seem to have an end goal for her. I mean, she prefers not to. And yeah, I guess I don't want to. I don't want to keep taking her money, you know. I also enjoy, to some extent, the connection that we have. And I don't know whether it's me wanting to push her to get you know, like to get change in her life, and she's not ready for it. And so I just need to give myself some empathy about that, you know. Or maybe she's not the kind of client that I want to work with. I want to, you know, have maybe more results oriented. So I'm confused, and that's a little bit about it.
Alright, so that was a better example of what we should be doing. And again, the video we saw before with dried shirt, that's what we probably shouldn't be doing. Now in this case, as you can see, on the right hand side we had the client, on the left hand side we had the counselor. And I'm not sure if you were able to pay attention, and if you haven't, I will say perhaps it's a good idea to pause this video, rewind it and watch this clip again. You will see again the one on the left hand side, the counselor. She was using the small nodding of the head as a minimal response, non-verbal in this case. She was making eye contact. You can see how she's got an open posture. She's facing directly the client, signaling that I am here for you. I am interested in what you have to say. She was also a few times using this phrase we used before, this sound we used before, almost like saying, yes, I can hear you. Again, I'm here for you, I understand what you're saying, and I'm listening. So you can see all these minimal responses that we've been talking about put into practice. Again, if you haven't picked up on all of those, perhaps watch this clip again. These are the things that we'll probably want to incorporate in our own practice. And these are very likely the things that you will want to show in your video in assessment 3 to do well. And I'll say very likely, I'll say probably you should show these skills. Alright, going back to active listening. There are a number of ways in which counselors can use non-verbal behavior to show the client they are actively listening. These include matching non-verbal behavior, the use of movement, and facial expression. Matching nonverbal behavior involves doing a similar behavior to what the client is doing. For example, if the client is somewhat nervous and they're sitting on the edge of their chair, then the counselor could match that behavior and sit on the edge of their chair as well. Or if the client is leaning back using a more relaxed posture, the counselor could adopt a similar posture as well. Again, this is done to show this idea of joining, and that we are tuning in to their feelings, to their emotions, to what is happening for them right now. There are two things to keep in mind here. First, we don't want to look like we are copying exactly what the client is doing, as this would probably be confusing for the client. But more importantly, regardless of what the client does, we want to keep an open posture to always invite the client to keep disclosing and to feel welcome in the counseling session. We can also think about movement and how this can be used by the counselor to denote active listening. For example, when someone is talking about something distressing or painful, we can lean forward, showing that we are actively listening. We can do this to show that we are tuning in with what they're experiencing and we are able to see the world through their eyes. We can also think about facial expression. Facial expression usually has a significant impact on this idea of active listening, because our facial expression shows pretty much what we're thinking. For example, let's imagine someone talks about having stolen something as a child, and we make a face showing disapproval or disgust. You can see how our facial expression conveys a judgmental stance and conditional acceptance rather than unconditional. Our judgmental facial expression is likely to hinder the rapport building process rather than help the rapport building process. But if someone is talking about a painful experience and we show them an expression of interest and genuine concern, the client is likely to understand our facial expression as a sign that we are attentively listening and we care genuinely for their well-being. Another way of showing active listening is how we use our voice. Because when we speak, it's not only our words that convey a message, but also the way we talk. For example, if we talk rapidly or mumble, our message will not be as effective. So, when you talk to your clients, think about the clarity and volume of your voice, the speed with which we speak, and the tone of voice we're using. But also keep in mind this idea of joining. Remember what we said before, ideally we would like to match our client's behavior to deliberately show that we are actively listening. One way to show that we are indeed actively listening is to try and match their way of speaking. For example, if we have a client who's talking really fast, either because that's the way they talk, or because they're nervous right now, or they're trying to rush through the thought process, we could be talking a little bit faster to match their speed, and then slowly, as the session progresses, we could deliberately try and slow down our speech to our natural speed to try and make our client feel a little bit more comfortable. And here we have another short clip where we will see some of the concepts we have been talking about. See if you can recognize them, and then I can briefly take you through it.
So there is a concern on the job. I'd like to hear about it.
Okay, well, a few days ago, I found out that I was passed over for a promotion at my job. And this is, I've been with this company for 15 years.
15 years.
And I was really pretty upset when I first found out, because the person who got the job, first of all, is a male. He's only been with the company for 5 years.
So the guy that got the job's a male and been there for 15, been there just 5 years.
Just 5 years. And, you know, I think I'm much better qualified than he is for this position. I've gotten really good evaluations from my supervisor.
So again, that was a short clip just to show you how the person on the left, the counselor, is doing once more these minimal responses in the form of the also nodding a little bit. But he also did something different. This time he was actually doing something we haven't learned so far, but it was pretty much a reflection of content. We will talk about that in the next video, but basically what he was trying to do is reflect back to what the client, the person on the right, was talking about. Now, see if you can spot one tiny thing that perhaps could have been done a little bit better. And I was just making a pause, so I was trying to give you a few seconds to think about it. So I'll give you my take on it. My perspective, and this is why I wanted to put this video in here, because so far, other than the video with 𝓃𝒶𝑜'𝓈, which, you know, pretty much was showing all the things that we shouldn't be doing at all, the other two videos were showing things that we should be doing or trying to do. Now in this case, the counselor, at one stage, he interrupted the client. He was so eagerly trying to reflect the content, almost showing her that he was able to understand what she was saying, that he pretty much stepped on her, and she was almost stopping to give him the space to do what he was supposed to do. Now this is a mock-up session, and maybe this is something that it was in the script, so the actor on the right knew that this was going to happen, and they tried to make it a little bit organic. But there is a little bit of a mistake there, from my perspective, in terms of from the counselor, in terms of interrupting the client. That's something that, keep in mind, you shouldn't want to do, and this is what I meant by interrupting. And additionally, he made a mistake. He said 15 years when in fact was only 5 years. But that's, you know, that happens, can happen to anyone, and we're not exempt from that. However, keep in mind this idea of not interrupting. And finally, we can talk about the use of silence. Now, the use of silence is very important. We can probably talk for hours about this, and I'll very likely do a separate video taking you through some of my experiences with previous clients. But basically, The use of silence is something really hard for us to do because in the beginning, as maybe inexperienced counselors, we are sometimes a little bit afraid of the use of silence. And we tend to jump immediately to, as soon as we see a silence, we try to fill it with our thoughts or questions or things like that. But the reality is some people need that space. I would actually go to say most clients will probably need that space and the silence. Because while we may think we are not doing a good job because there is silence, they may be thinking, they may actually be thinking, they may be really entangled in their own thought process. So the use of silence is really important, and it can help convey or strengthen this rapport building exercise we've been talking about, and this idea of bridging the emotions between the counselor and the client. And it's not just about staying silent, but staying attentive. We are actively listening to what the client is, in this case, not saying, but we're still observing their behavior, we're observing what they're doing, whether they're about to talk, whether we need to maintain that silence for a bit longer. Maybe they're in the thought process of trying to verbalize their thoughts. So again, very important to consider the use of silence. And with that, we conclude this video. I hope you enjoy this content, hope you find it useful, and I'll see you in the next video.